think we can get started. I do want to be mindful of time and respect people's time, especially all of you on this call today, the panelists who gave us time. So I very much appreciate that. My name is Andréa Rodríguez. I'm the director in the Coalition of Urban Serving Universities, and we are in direct partnership with the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities. So we are excited, APLU and USU is excited to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month with you all and sort of give an opportunity, space, and platform to hear from three extraordinary leaders from public institutions that are members of our association, and just hear a little bit about their journey and how they're seeing and hearing things and how that fits into the celebration of this month. I also do want to note that I will be using the word Latinx as a way to be inclusive of our other communities. And I do want to also note that our incoming APLU board chair, President Wadid Cruzado of Montana State University, will be taking lead starting in November. So we are excited about that. And she's, if everyone knows, she's from Mayagüez, Puerto Rico, extraordinary, fearless, bold leader. And this also comes off the news, I think 2 weeks ago, CSU Chancellor Joseph Castro, who is current president of Fresno State, who is the first person of color and the first chancellor of the 23 campus system who identifies as Latino. Such an extraordinary moment for our people, our culture, la comunidad. And with that, it falls within the 1 month celebration. And I think when I heard him speak and thank everyone, he thanked his family, thanked his mother. And I'm like, that's so part of who we are as people. And each one of you, Chancellor Arvizu, President Rodríguez, President de la Torre, I've read your welcome remarks, your thank you remarks, multiple interviews I've heard across, read different essays, and each one of them, you've always made sure to mention la familia, the community, your people, who you come from, to give voice and give presence to where your roots are. And I think that's so much of what we're trying to do here at APLU USU, is to honor that. And I think this panel will do that, just that. So before we kick things off, just some housekeeping items for folks joining. This is a webinar, which means I can't see everyone's beautiful faces, just these three lovely humans. But if you can just use the Q&A function at the bottom, we'll try our best to get everyone's questions answered. Also, we probably can't, but please feel free to just enter it. And my colleague, Jeff Lieberson, will be facilitating and just letting me know as they come in, okay? We do have 1 hour, and I do want to be mindful of time, make sure we do that. So we'll have like 35, 45 minutes of conversation and then open it up for Q&A. And last but not least, I do want to give a big shout out for APLU USU for putting this event on. I know this is the first one ever, and we're excited to see where the future years come from. And for everyone joining the call, it may be good morning, good afternoon, or buenos dias, or buenas tardes. So, and a big final shout out to my family who is joining the call from New York City. Also, there are folks from Uruguay and from Ecuador. Hi. Yes, big shout out. Okay, so now I'd like to introduce our phenomenal extraordinary leaders who joined us today. President Adela de la Torre of San Diego State University, President Havidán Rodríguez of the University of Albany SUNY system. Go SUNY, I'm an alum. And finally, but not least, Chancellor Dan Arvizu of New Mexico State University. Thank you for joining us all. So I'm going to kick off the first question and have President de la Torre answer. What does Hispanic Latinx Heritage Month mean to you personally and as a leader of a public university?
Well, Andrea, I think you said it very succinctly. It really speaks about family. In other words, when I think about my own journey and the journey of so many of our students, it is a result of a family that cared about education and brought us together to make sure that we could be successful. So in my journey, I was raised by a single mother and my grandmother and my primary language was Spanish. So that in the context of how I was going to move forward, it was navigating in that world as well as another world, but they were the ones there to help the journey. When I think about Hispanic Heritage Month, I think about my community and that extended community with tios y tías and primos y primas, the whole 9 yards, right? And that is what really creates a kind of impetus for individuals to feel reaffirmed and use. I think I was cut off, but I'll end on that.
Thank you, President Torre. I think this is sort of like the mood of 2020, independent of others, is sort of like, I'm having technical issues, right? So, okay. Thank you so much, President Torre. Chancellor Arvizu?
Yes, and I don't know if I had technical difficulties too. I had to log back in, so hopefully you'll be able to hear me. Let me just follow on where President de la Torre left off, and that is, you know, I think absolutely how this month of opportunity to celebrate our heritage gives us time to reflect. And I think, you know, the first thing I do is I thank my mom and dad, just like you started with. You know, my dad was essentially an immigrant, but he was essentially an orphan as well. My grandparents died very young, so my father actually came across the border and just shined shoes on the border many years ago. And when the war started, he actually joined World War II and became a citizen while he was in the service. So it kind of reinforces a couple of things. My mom's family all comes from another part of Mexico, Hermosillo in Sonora. But the values that I was raised with and that are part of my celebration of the Hispanic Heritage Month is that we are focused on God, family, and country. You know, it was very clear that you know, my family, you know, everybody was very patriotic. A lot of I think gratefulness, appreciation for what this country has to offer. You know, hardworking, modest in our accomplishments. We love to celebrate and socialize, as everybody knows. So this is an opportunity for us to think about all of those things and to be, I think, you know, again, appreciative of the value system that the Hispanic culture brings. You know, when it comes to, you know, my opportunity to now lead an institution, it really is personal with me because I started literally half a century ago at New Mexico State University as a student. I was the first in my family to go to college. I was you know, really without much of a rudder in terms of an understanding of what higher ed was really about. And it was because of friends and family that I actually attended school. I actually had a music scholarship, had to play trumpet in the Pride Band, which I to this day still very much, you know, I'm totally grateful for having had that experience. But now I'm thinking about what does this institution do as it helps the underrepresented minorities. When I went to school, literally many years ago, we had roughly about less than 25% of our student body was Hispanic. Today, we're 66%, almost 2/3 Hispanic. So we've come a long way. It's kind of very different. And so it's incredibly rewarding for me to come back to my alma mater where I got a start and to be able to give back and impart, hopefully, on those who starting the journey that I was at literally 50 years ago. And to see the enthusiasm and to see the absolute delight that people have in, first of all, seeing one of their own, you know, in the leadership position at the institution is inspiring to me personally, as well as I am so rewarded by what I see is the untapped talent of our Hispanic community that can be a tremendous contribution to the future. So those two things actually provide me with a great grounding in the fact that Hispanic Heritage Month is kind of one of those points where I can stop and reflect. And it's extremely, I think, inspiring to me personally to be a part of this celebration.
Thank you so much, Chancellor Rodríguez. So we may tap you to play the trumpet as a kickoff for our annual meeting. So just an FYI there.
I can play the Aggie Fact song, but I'm having trouble with all the other songs, so I'll practice on it.
Thank you, President Rodríguez.
Muy buenas tardes to everybody, and thank you all for being here. First, I want to, thank APLU and Peter and Andrea for organizing this event. As Andrea said, the first ever at APLU, and we hope it will be the first, but certainly not the last. And to my colleagues Adela and Dan, it's a pleasure to be here with you as well. And a shout out to Wadet Cruzado, who called us La Gente Linda of this panel. So thank you, Wadet. Hispanic Heritage Month is critically important for us, right? And I agree with both Adela and Dan. It's about family. It's about culture, right? It's about celebrating our heritage, and that is critically important. You know, several years ago, I co-edited a book titled Latinas and Latinos in the United States, Changing the Face of America. And it focused on the significant impacts and contributions and diversity and heterogeneity of the Latino, Latina, Latinx population in the United States through generations, right? Because we have been here for generations. Some of us have been here since before the United States was the United States. And so this is what Hispanic Heritage Month is about. You know, I was listening to a colleague the other day being interviewed and was asked the same question. And he said, Hispanic Heritage Month is a small token of appreciation for the great contributions and the tremendous impact that Latinx people have had in this country for generations. And so this is what we need to do, you know, and as institutions of higher education, we need to embark in these celebrations. I don't think we do enough to celebrate these types of events and these types of culture, whether it be Hispanic Heritage Month, Black Heritage Month, whether it be Pride Month, Asian American Heritage Month. We need to celebrate our diversity. We need to recognize that diversity makes us a much stronger institution, a much stronger community, and a much stronger country. And so when we celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month, this is what we're celebrating. We're celebrating our lives, our history, our culture, our language, who we are, and the significant impact we've had in this country and beyond.
President Rodríguez, that was a very remarkable response. And I think you touched on the community and sort of like the focus on and the responsibilities that institutions play in sort of like embarking and sort of embracing that culture. So I think to that point, I think I like to start off the question number 2 with you. So how has the Hispanic Latinx community thrived at your institution, and how did that compare from a decade ago?
That question was for President Rodríguez, yes?
Sí, President Rodríguez.
Okay, thank you. I didn't hear that. So thank you.
No worries.
So, you know, we, as an institution of higher education, we are strongly committed to the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as such, we have made significant progress in this area. For example, when you think about the Latinx population, student population here at the University at Albany, in 2009, 2010, our Hispanic undergraduate population was about 8.8% of the total student body. 2019, 2020, the Latino, Latina population, Latinx population is 17.5%. So we have more than doubled our Latinx population here at the University at Albany. And our Latinx population is actively engaged in on and off campus, making significant contributions. Another critical component of what we do at the university, which the Latinx students have really benefited from, is our EOP, Educational Opportunity Program, which is a program that has been at UAlbany. We just celebrated last year, I believe it was, 50 years, right? And this is for first generation, low income, underrepresented minority students, if you will. And close to half of those students Latino, Latina, Latinx students here at the university. So we created this program 50 years ago to really have a significant impact in terms of diversifying our population, in terms of providing the services that are needed to these students as we continue to move forward. You know, and quite recently, we're happy to say that the EOP program was recognized as one of the finalists for Examples in Excelencia by Excelencia en Educación. And so we're very proud of the progress we've made. That said, there's so much more work to do, right? There's so many more things that we need to accomplish as an institution of higher education. We are nowhere near as an institution, as a state, or as a country in terms of where we need to be regarding the Latinx population in our institutions and in our country.
Thank you, President Rodríguez. I'm also an EOP alum, so I'm glad that you mentioned that. Shout out to EOP from SUNY Brockport. Person de la Torre.
So San Diego State University has been a Hispanic serving institution since 2012. So 30% of our students are Latinx. We have a campus on the Imperial Valley, which is 91% Hispanic, or identified as such. We're also a border institution. We are the major public institution on the border from the Pacific to the border of Arizona. And so we play a very significant role in that. Now, I say this because I believe when I came in, I would say we were Hispanic enrolling, but not a Hispanic serving. And there's a big distinction. So often we talk about the numbers, but the numbers aren't really what we really want to talk about. Our new strategic goal, which has just evolved, one of our goals is to become a Research One institution, but a special Hispanic serving institution, meaning that in the context of what we do, not only in terms of the educational pathways for our students in terms of graduation and professional growth, we also want to make sure that as we move forward in hiring faculty, right now we're a little under 20% Latinx faculty, but we need to increase that. We also need to look at our research being integrated into our mission, into our goals, into our regional location. So we are actually moving through a very comprehensive approach to really become a serving institution, a one that really provides not only the opportunity for academic success, but also create the leaders of the future. San Diego's also in this region, San Diego State is a critical workforce engine for the region of San Diego, but we want to see our students become the leaders. You know, in a state like California, over 50% of the students in K-12 are identify as Latinx. Yet, when we look at leadership, and I really applaud, the mentioning of Joe Castro as a chancellor, great colleague, is a wonderful leader, but we need leaders who head our every single sector of the economy, from whether it is a biotech firm to the head of a higher education system to the head of any corporate organization. And so San Diego State is really focused in creating the next generation of leaders who reflect the state of California and the region of San Diego.
Thank you so much, President Torre. Chancellor Arvizu.
Well, so I mentioned earlier in my opening remarks that we've come a long way in terms of the demographics. New Mexico State University, our system, which I'm the chancellor of the entire system, is about 24,000 students, and over the course of the last 50 years, we've really come into being a minority serving institution. We've been a Hispanic serving institution literally now for decades. You have to, I think 25% is the threshold. Where, like I mentioned earlier, we're at 2/3 and still increasing. So the numbers kind of speak for themselves. That does reflect the communities in which we serve. So New Mexico State University is a land grant, in fact, a space grant and Hispanic serving institution. And that designation, I think, is really, really important. So we've been focused on things that relate to our underserved, low income population, especially those in the rural areas, more specifically over the past few years. When myself and the president of our main campus, Dr. Flores, came in not too long ago, a couple of years now, we developed a strategic plan that would position us for the future. And in that strategic plan, it obviously focuses on the mission objective of a land grant, Hispanic serving institution. But to put a finer point on it, we also made one of our mission mobility of our underrepresented minority community. And it's in that context that we feel, first of all, that one of the biggest issues that face our nation is the growing divide between the haves and the have-nots. Call that the wealthy and the people that are essentially without means. And those are disproportionate now in terms of wealth creation. So as a consequence of that, there is this incredible, what I'm going to call untapped human resource potential in our underserved communities, both the Hispanic community, Latinx community, the African American community, as well as the Native American community. And in these communities, there is tremendous opportunity. And thus, those of us in higher ed, I think, need to reach in and understand how can we serve those communities better. So we've come a long way in that journey. Several decades ago, NSF invested in the STEM Alliance for Minority Participation, the so-called AMP program. It's been exceptionally, I think, successful in the New Mexico context. If you look at New Mexico as a whole, we've literally, we have 5x the number of graduates from Hispanic community over the course of the last several decades. So we were, less than 200 at one point. We're over 1,000 now in terms of production, in terms of STEM baccalaureate degrees. Very important for our community because 70% of those people stay within the community and continue to contribute. So this is about looking at how can we as an institution support our state demographics so that we don't leave a large fraction of our population behind and move forward very aggressively. We've as President Rodríguez said earlier regarding the diversity of our Latinx Hispanic community, it's extremely diverse, and we have old time Hispanic heritage that's been here for hundreds of years, 400 years, I think, to be exact. And then we have those that are more recent entries, and we have a lot of new immigrants in our communities as well. And we are focused on student success and making sure that we address the needs of those people as well. And I know we'll get to a question later, maybe around DACA, but we have a program called the CAMP program, and it's the College Assistant for Migrant program. Exceptional program because it takes those who are in the most dire conditions of being family members of migrant farm workers who are actively in the field and giving them an opportunity. With this program over the last 5 years, the Department of Ed gave us a grant. We've touched well over 600 of those students, 90-something, 95, 97% graduation rate for the students in that cohort group, and 70% of them stay in the community and continue to contribute. And it's a marvelous opportunity. So we're making progress in terms of reaching those who would otherwise not have a voice or not have an opportunity. And that's extremely exciting to me personally, because I think as a community, that's where we need to go. Like San Diego State, we also want an R1 institution and are focused on not just student success, but elevating our research, improving our outreach to our communities. Again, all with the lens of how do we reach the underserved community. And what we have to do different is we have to meet them where they are. They have cultural issues, they have social issues, they have financial issues. It is in our community we need to know that it's not for lack of talent, it's for lack of access, that system and the catalyst to make sure that we meet those needs, because this is untapped human capital, untapped potential for this country. And it'll either be part of the solution for the future or it'll be part of the problem. And I think we have a focus to make sure that happens. And there's lots of things that we can do. I'll stop there and continue with the conversation.
Thank you so much, Chancellor Arvizu. I think you all touched on ways the universities can start or have been doing some phenomenal work to sort of, to Chancellor Arvizu's point, tap the untapped resources that we already have. How do we leverage the staff, the faculty, that community cultural wealth, community members? So I think with that in mind, President Torre, you made a phenomenal point in that we were Hispanic enrolling, but not Hispanic serving. And I think that's sort of like the rhetoric and the narrative we've heard in the past. So I think with that, I would love for you to kick off for this next question. It's like, knowing what we know in the space that we're living in and what's happening around us and what our students, our community, our familias are experiencing, what can universities do to continue their recruitment, their retainment and graduation of the Hispanic Latinx students?
Clearly what's important is having the right type of support structures and really understanding the climate. We're right now in a climate of fear, and it is permeating across the country in higher education, and particularly for our Latino students. And if we look at our DACA students, those students, of course, have been under tremendous stress and anxiety. So as institutions, what do we need to do? Well, at San Diego State, we have an undocumented center that is specifically reaches out to not only the students, the family. We have legal support structures through the CSU system and through our campus so that students can get the legal counseling on immigration issues. We have a Latinx center, which is important not only in terms of reinforcing the importance of the cultural assets that students bring to the table, but also to connect them to the resources to support. Now more than ever, with what's happening with COVID, I know in San Diego County, if we look at disproportionate impact of COVID, it is on our Latino community. That is a community that's having the most, the greatest impact, negative impact. And so we have a greater responsibility now in COVID with the economic situation, with the attacks on immigration, to create the kinds of support structures. So with that, we have developed an emergency, with our emergency support team, funding opportunities for students, psychological supports for students, and also working closely with the county. It takes a village. Universities can't do everything alone. So we're working very close with our county health department. Our School of Public Health is working with contract tracing, training culturally sensitive folks and staff in public health so that our community understands the importance of testing and social distancing and making sure that they practice important hygiene practices, all in a language, in a way that's culturally and linguistically appropriate. So what's happening today is really important to understand. It is that we as an institution, all institutions have an obligation to work with the community in ways that have never happened before. In other words, we are now have to understand that in order to support the structure so that our students can be successful in school, we have to work with all of our partners that surround us, whether it's with the city mayor's office or with the county health department or with the state, to make sure that we can create the kind of safe structures where students can be successful in school. And so I would say right now in San Diego State, we're really focused on this multi-factor approach, multi-system approach in an environment that is fueled with uncertainty. And I say that because I have never in my history in higher education seen the level of anxiety and stress in my students, in my faculty, in my staff, and real fear, particularly within the context of our students, because the uncertainty of not knowing whether or not you can stay and learn is not just predicated on federal law, but now in whether or not your community is safe in terms of a disease that has no purpose but destroying human life. So we are really at a crossroads, I think, in higher education, in that we need to shore together all of the resources and all the social networks and all the systems to make sure that this particular population, but all communities, but when I look at my community, when I look at San Diego and I look at California, this is a community that has been overwhelmingly victimized by this pandemic at this moment.
Thank you so much, President de la Torre. President Rodríguez?
Yes, and just to follow up on some of the issues that Adela presented, and setting aside, if we could, for a minute, right, COVID and the dramatic financial impacts that this pandemic has had in institutions of higher education, and we focus exclusively on this theme, which are really interrelated. First of all, sort of four components. Faculty, right? We had an APL webinar similar to this one in which we talked about diversity and faculty diversity. And, we've made little to no progress in the past 10 years in terms of diversifying our faculty across this country. This is a major issue. This is a major challenge. Students in the classrooms want to see people that look like them. They want to see mentors to help them along the way. So this is a major challenge that we all confront. How do we continue, or how do we begin to systematically diversify our faculty to represent the demographic composition of our student population? Number two is climate. how do we create, it's all great about enrolling students of color, right? And the Latinx and African-American students, Asian Americans, but how do we develop a climate in which students and everybody in our community feels welcomed and is welcomed? That is critically important. And that is generated through the types of initiatives and activities, programmatic things that we do in order to provide our students the support that they need, which is factor number 3, right? We talk about Latinx, students of color, and many of these students are first generation, low income students, right? It's not only about bringing students to our institutions, it's about retaining and graduating our students from these institutions in a 4 to 6 year period. And this is where I think, for example, at SUNY and Albany, the EOP program has been incredibly important with 95, 96, 98% first year retention rate, right? We developed the programs and the structure in order to support the students. And then really outcomes is the 4th factor, making sure that our students graduate, that they become engaged global citizens. And for example, here at Albany, we are a research university, and we've been recognized as one of the top institutions in the country for the economic mobility of our students, going from the lower ranks of the economic ladder to the upper rungs of the economic ladder. And that is particularly important, and especially now bringing back COVID into the discussion, right? We know we've discussed extensively the disproportionate impacts of COVID-19 on communities of color in terms of the positivity rates, in terms of sickness, in terms of mortality, etc. Communities of color have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. We have 40% of our students that are students of color, about 17.5, almost 18% African-American, 17.5 Latino, Latina, Latinx students. So we also say that as this community, our students have also been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, and that has significant implications for our students, for their families, for the communities, and for this institution, because we have a moral and ethical responsibility to ensure that students are succeeding here at Albany. And so the governor of the state of New York tasked the university at Albany to lead a study focusing on the disproportionate impacts of COVID-19 on communities of color here in the state of New York. And so if we can bring our researchers and our faculty to really think systematically about how is it that COVID-19 is impacting our Latinx communities and impacting our other communities of color, and what we can do as institutions to address these problems and focus on the opportunities in a systematic, holistic way that will have long-term and sustainable positive impacts. That is the challenge, and that is the opportunity before us.
Well stated. Thank you, President Rodríguez. Chancellor Arvizu.
Yes, and I really like that answer, President Rodríguez. I think you've got a good finger on the pulse of the needs of the community. One of the things that we're facing down here in New Mexico, in addition to the things that both Adela and President Rodríguez have talked about, is that we live in an environment where we have tremendous poverty and tremendous lack of access to resources that are necessary. And so much of our state, either in the northwest part of the state where we have our Native American communities concentrated, or in the southern part of our state near the border, along the Mexican border, the Santa Teresa crossing, what we find is that there are communities, fairly large communities, where less than 50% of the families in that community have any subscription to internet media of any kind. So no broadband, no technical capabilities, and yet we're in a post-COVID world where the first tool that we used was let's isolate, let's go everybody online, let's essentially teach everybody digitally, when we do not have an infrastructure that supports our underrepresented people, especially at the very low income, northwest part of the state, southern part of the state. We have no broadband. I consider that to be almost a fundamental right in today's environment, for being able to contribute in society and being able to advance is to have, you know, connectivity to essentially our digital economies. Clearly a wave of the future. So this just puts an added burden on what has already been a very difficult challenge in terms of how do we get the kind of representation that we need, how do we serve these communities, and it comes down to resources. It really does. So in our institution, what we've focused on is how can we make sure that we support those, especially in the lowest income areas, you know, the so-called Pell Grant eligible students, which obviously family incomes less than 48,000 is kind of what that represents. More than 60% of our students are in the lowest 0 to 30,000 a year and 30 to 48,000 a year. In those cohort groups, we have made an especial attempt to make sure that we provide financial institutional support in addition to the Pell Grants, in addition to the state grants, in addition to all the things we have with lottery and a variety of other opportunities for revenues for students, but we know we need to do more because our students, the number one issue that they will tell you is the way in which they can go to school is finances. It's, you know, they have to support their families, they have to work, they have to do a variety of other things, and they just don't have money to go to school. So we need to make it, you know, attractive and available to them. And so in that context, we look at a thing called cost of attendance. And when we do cost of attendance, we look at not just tuition and fees, but room and board and books and supplies and all of the things that it takes to go to school. And that's the cost of attendance. And then we provide financial support to our students on average that is much, much greater than tuition and fees and books and supplies. It actually eats into what their costs are for room and board, because frankly, that's the part that's going to be out of pocket for those students. And so we want to make sure that we are meeting the needs of where they're at and how we can put those packages together. I think, you know, President Rodríguez talked about all of the things that we can, as institutions, can do in terms of providing the infrastructure to support those students. But the challenges today are even greater than they were pre-COVID. And yet it is more of an imperative now that we be successful. So reinventing how we approach this it should be part of our calculus and our thinking, and engaging with our communities is a big piece of it. Economic development in New Mexico, at least, is top priority. Diversifying our economy. New Mexico lives and dies with oil and gas, and COVID kind of stopped our economy, and the economy stopped oil and gas demand, and as a consequence, we're in deficit spending as opposed to the surplus. So we've got our work cut out for diversifying the economy, entrepreneur programs so that people can thrive in their own communities, but that education being a huge discriminator of our underserved minority populations.
Thank you so much all for your great responses. And I'm mindful of time, and there are questions coming in the chat. So I may skip a question or two just to honor those folks who are joining and are asking questions. So I do want to ask the questions of the DACA and the undocumented student population. I think each of you touched on this somewhat. So APLU has long advocated for legislative solutions that would provide paths to citizenship and work authorization for undocumented students. And we sort of have seen, President Torre, you mentioned that there's great uncertainty for these students and these student groups. I think it would be great to hear from each of you sort of like, what can institutions do to continue to support those students who are enrolled in DACA, but also the students who are not able to, given the climate that we're in and no longer able to enroll into the DACA program, right? So more expansive in thinking about the undocumented student, that learner. So what can we do to best support and promote these students and find the way to keep them at the institution and engage them in more of the community and education centered that each of your institutions hone in on?
So what I would say, what's really critical right now is to understand how the climate, the current national climate is affecting our students, our DACA students. One of the things that we have really focused on, and I'll give you a specific example, is when the CARES dollars were released, there were no CARES dollars available for our DACA students. We dipped into our own institutional funds to make sure that we would signal to those students that we would have funds to support them equally like all other students. We did this working carefully, obviously, with our legal counsel, but also with our Undocumented Resource Center, making sure that they weren't fearful. As they saw their rights being chipped away by executive orders and the fear that they would not be able to reapply, we worked across the CSU system to collectively ensure that we would be there to support them. And all the presidents, many of the presidents of the CSU signed multiple petitions in support of the DACA students. In addition, we made sure that in the context of their need for legal guidance, that they would have access to that to really discuss not only their personal needs, but the needs of their family members. Because as you know, most DACA students are in mixed family status communities and families. And because of that, it isn't just about that individual student, it's about the family as well. Because we are on the border, we have deep ties with our sister institutions in Mexico, whether it's Colegio de la Frontera, UABC. We work very carefully to make sure that in any event that there was a need for students who lived or needed to cross a border, that there would be uninterrupted opportunities for education. In fact, we have classes that are cross-listed with our sister institutions in Mexico as well. And finally, of course, what is important is to recognize is that we also worked with our faculty to make sure that they were sensitive to these issues. Because without a context of understanding the fears, the context of the concerns, without the kinds of support structures, that would not be possible. When we launched our Latinx Center, which was to address this broader community, we made sure that that was situated centrally on the campus, which is in the library, which is the most central point of the campus. When we worked with our Imperial Valley campus, which is 91% Latino students, 70% Pell eligible, we made sure, again, that we were working to ensure that there were the support structures and that they had the kind of support, particularly in this COVID environment. As mentioned, one of the issues in the more rural areas, which is in Imperial Valley, access to internet was a problem. So we made sure that they had, if they needed laptops, those were available. If they needed to get hotspots, we provided hotspots as well. And again, making sure that they were treated equally. So the status of immigration status is not a status for us at SDSU. What is important is that we treat them equally as we treat all our students so that they can be successful. When you look at the graduation rates of our Latinx students, they're not any different, marginally different from those of our white students. In fact, you know, a couple of years ago, we were #1 in the graduations performance rate for US News and World Report, and that gap is a target. So we don't want any delays in graduation or success of those students. But ultimately, we have to be very, very aware of the fact that the climate for these students during this last year has been devastating, not only for them, their families, and we have to support them in their goal to create equity, not only in terms of education, but also in their social position in society. They certainly deserve to be at an equal footing as all the citizens that we have in the United States.
Thank you so much, President Torre. I would like to have an opportunity now, Chancellor Arvizu, if you could provide us with some comments and thoughts.
Sure, thank you. And President de la Torre, I mean, I'm going to borrow some of the wonderful programs that she's already implementing at Cal State. I think what we do very similar is that, first of all, we focus on making sure that our students are successful. And once they're admitted and they're in our care, we are going to do everything we know how to facilitate their success. Meet them where they are, do the things that are necessary. Much like we've already heard, you know, we have to be sensitive to all of the political forces that are coming at us from all these different directions. You know, you get executive orders that tell you to do one thing, and you get, you know, essentially other initiatives starting at the state level that do something completely different. And there's a lot of tension that continues to occur. What we try to do is stay out of that fray and make sure that we protect our students. And we do so by making sure that they are comfortable in you know, filling out the FAFSA. Something so simple as being able to essentially apply for federal aid is something that most DACA students are afraid to do for the reasons that we've already talked about. They don't feel safe. It's uncertain. There's clearly lots of dynamics in the press and other places that make them feel very uncomfortable. We need to shield them from that. And that's essentially what we try to do, because we're focused on our students and the students being successful. We apply our institutional support to the degree that we can to these students that are underserved and don't have other options for themselves. When we did find that many of our students didn't have access to either the technology, being laptops, or the internet connectivity, we supplied both. We literally bought 3,000 iPads for our two-year students in our DACC campus, in our Doña Ana campus. We have continued to do all of the things that are necessary to give them access to broadband so they can actually go to a hotspot. In some cases, up in the northwest part of the state, a student will drive 100 miles just to get to a hotspot so they can actually take classes. These are, I mean, in our own country, we talk about these as if they're third world nations, and they will tell you from the Native American community that this is what we look like. We look like a third world nation. So we've got a long ways to go in terms of just infrastructure. But when it comes to protecting our students, I think much of what President de la Torre said is exactly what we're doing or aspire to do, is to make sure that our students are successful so that they can begin to provide the kind of resources to their families and to that infrastructure that will set a new tone for the future, and hoping to do that in our own communities as well.
Thank you so much, Chancellor Arvizu. President Rodríguez.
Yes, so just to add to the wonderful comments that my colleagues have already made, right? We just need to highlight that, you know, these past few years for DACA students and other immigrants to the United States, this has been a few years of really fear, uncertainty, intimidation, right? In which, you know, many of the things that we have accomplished, we're seeing our country stepping back. And so we need to come together as institutions of higher education to systematically address these issues. You know, in the summer, we had a victory, a legal victory regarding DACA, but that can go away anytime soon unless we pull our efforts and as institutions of higher education to systematically address these issues and provide our DACA students the services and the support that they need. One of the things that I would like to highlight is the importance of state leadership in this regard, right? And how states respond to this. And so, for example, enacted in the fiscal year 2020, we had the Jose Peralta New York State DREAM Act, which is named in honor of our late senator, who championed the efforts to allow, quote unquote, undocumented immigrants to qualify for college tuition assistance, right? So now these students here in the state of New York qualify for our tuition assistance program, the Excelsior Scholarship, right? States need to take this leadership and help institutions of higher education in supporting our students financially. And we as institutions need to take the lead role in, as I said before, providing the support, providing the services, and providing the climate where everyone is welcome and everybody feels welcome.
Thank you so much all for your wonderful responses, because so as I suspected, and I think as we all know, 1 hour goes very quickly here. So I will ask the last question, but I will ask for each of you to answer using one word, okay? So it's the last question, it's the final question. So knowing everything you know, I see Chancellor Arvizu just leaning back already trying to come up with a word. Knowing everything you know as a leader, as a scholar, as an activist for your community, for la comunidad, your people, your culture, your families and friends, if you could travel back in time, using one word, what is one piece of advice you would give to yourself as a first-year college student? President de la Torre?
I would say hope. Hope.
Beautiful word. Chancellor Arvizu.
Let me unmute. You've really limited us. I want to do 2 words. Be bold would be the way I would say it. Don't be afraid of uncertainty.
I love it.
Dream back and don't hold back. Dream, you know, big and don't hold back.
That could be one word if we put in a hashtag.
That's not one word, but that's what I'm going to say.
I'm going to give a couple more words.
If we could put it all in the hashtag, I think the hope, the dream, the Chancellor Arvizu, your words. I mean, I think
Boldness.
all the words, yeah, all the words that each of you shared and the responses that you shared to the questions is so critical, especially because I'm seeing these questions come in the chat, and they're phenomenal questions that folks are asking. And I want to now take time and honor one of the questions from President Heidi Anderson. She's the president of University of Maryland, Eastern Shore. Thank you for joining us, President Anderson. I'm sure you have a full plate and a full calendar, so I appreciate you joining us on the call today. So she would like for each of you to talk a little bit about the philosophy of Hispanic enrolling versus Hispanic serving and how to achieve this at all of our institutions going forward.
So I guess I can start on that one.
Yes.
I think it's really, you have to come with a mindset of the cultural assets of the community and recognize that you're going to build on those assets as opposed to the deficits. And that's very key, because I think if you look at it in terms of just numbers or addressing deficits and skill sets, you're going to have, I think, a less successful outcome. I think you have to be willing to truly assess the climate of your campus in relationship to its capacity to embrace these students. It's going to require a commitment to ensure that your faculty staff are adequately trained in terms of the types of training so that they can recognize their implicit biases that exist. And I think it's true for any community. And it requires an investment of resources, a true investment in terms of the support structures, whether it's through your EOP, and we all have EOP programs that have had exceptional outcomes, or through identity centers. And in particular, when it comes to bringing in Latinx faculty, that is even an additional investment, because Latinx faculty in most institutions are not the majority of faculty there. And that's true for many minority faculty, but recognizing the tax that they pay as a role model and supporters of many of their students, really creating a way to create the kind of climate where they are going to have a reward structure in the tenure and promotion system that recognizes their contributions and also supports them in their research. So it really requires you to do a 360 on your campus to make sure that you have all the pieces in place for your faculty, for your staff, for your students, and of course, creating the types of community allies who are going to be there to support you on this journey as well. Because demographically, if you go to California, most of our schools are Hispanic serving. I mean, the numbers are overwhelmingly, that is the majority student. But are they truly Hispanic serving? I would say that very few are, because if we look at the overall faculty, overall staffing ratios, overall support structures, they are not where they need to be to create the kind of success and create the type of opportunities so that these students, particularly these students who we would love to see in the academy as faculty, will move forward in their careers in higher education. And so I do think we need to begin to be honest and create the kind of assessment structures so that we can move forward to truly become a Hispanic serving, or what I like to say, a Latinx serving institution.
I love it. Thank you so much, President Torre. President Rodríguez, would you like to share your thoughts?
Sure. And so along the lines that Adela mentioned, right? I mean, you know, Hispanic enrolling is about numbers, right? And numbers matter, right? Numbers do matter, but Hispanic enrolling is about numbers. Hispanic serving is about understanding the complexities of language and culture that these communities bring to our institution. Last week, actually, I sent a 2-page article to a group of colleagues here at the university highlighting the diversity and heterogeneity of the Latino, Latinx population in the United States, right? And one of the comments that I got back is, wow, that's too complicated. I said, yes, it's very complicated, right? But as institutions of higher education, it's our responsibility to understand that and to respond to that. It's about understanding the cultural diversity that we bring. It's about providing the support structures that these students need and faculty and staff need in order to be successful and to grow. It's about building the community that it's needed to support the growth and the success, the development of these individuals. And it's about educating our entire community through transformative changes in our curriculum to reflect the diversity of our communities and reflect the diversity of the Latinx population. Let me just finish by saying one of the things that I'm very proud of here at SUNY. SUNY established 3 years ago with the support again from the state. This is where state leadership is important. The Hispanic Leadership Institute, and I have the pleasure and the honor to be the executive director for SUNY's Hispanic Leadership Institute. And the goal of that program is to train generations of leaders within SUNY, the next department chairs, the next associate vice provost, the next associate vice president, the next provost, the next president, right? And we bring communities of Latinos and Latinas, Latinx to go through this intensive Hispanic Leadership Institute. And so when we say we are committed, that we want to serve, this is what we really need to do. We need to make significant investments and transformative change.
Thank you so much. And then we'll close this final question with Chancellor Arvizu.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say, it's such a privilege to be on this panel with these, exceptional leaders, in our Hispanic community. And I'm just honored to be with you. First, I think, and it's already been said, I'll just repeat very quickly. I think what we need to do as institutions is recognize that there are different needs for these communities. And if you recognize these different needs and are committed to their success, then you will do the things that are necessary to overcome the barriers that we have in cultural, in social, in economic challenges that some of these communities have. They're not all the same, but they all are very, very compelling in the sense that these are challenges that they can't solve by themselves. It is up to us in higher education to ensure that we understand what those differences are from the way we would ultimately, teach or instruct our population. And I'll say this, I think it goes without saying, but I'll say it just to put a final point on it, and that's without compromising excellence. There is no need in our attempt to make these programs special for these individuals who are challenged from their cultural backgrounds to suggest that somehow they're not up to the task of meeting the top quality standards that we've set for our institutions so that they can be productive citizens. And as President Rodríguez suggests, to be the leaders and the thought leaders and the political as well as business and industry leaders of the future in every sector. Because frankly, I think we are up to that task. And I think Latinos and Latinx, all of us can be part of something that can be very, very compelling for the country. So I think the future is potentially very bright for those of us that are focused on making these outcomes the wave of the future that they need to be.
Thank you so much to each and every one of you. We have amazing questions coming in the chat, and I'm sorry we don't have enough time to answer them, but we are committed to the work. It's clear that President Torre, President Rodríguez, and Chancellor Arvizu are also committed to this work. And as a member association, we are committed to advancing and progressing and elevating the voice of the Hispanic and Latinx comunidad. And I think with that said, I want to close out because it is 3 on the dot, so I'm good with time. I want to close out with 6 words shared by our wonderful panelists. Dream big, be bold, and have hope. I want to thank each of the panelists today for joining us and for sharing your amazing words and your insights and giving us the time to doing this. And for everyone who joined us across the entire country, because we had great participation.
Yeah.
Many
Thank you all.
Gracias.
Thank you. Gracias a todas.
Felicidades.
Chao. Felicidades.